Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Danny Berg. A little while ago we did a video talking about the worst doctors of all time, right up here. They were pretty scary, I won't lie, but it seems like a lot of you have a bit of a morbid curiosity when it comes to jobs that save people's lives being done by people who just kind of want to end them. These cases are very rare, so please remember that guys, but when they do happen, it's not only doctors. This is the top 10 worst nurses of all time. Coming in at number 10 we have Elizabeth Wettlaufer. This Canadian nurse made international news in 2016 when she was charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder. Her victims were mainly old people at a nursing home. The cause of death was overdose, possibly insulin. Those who knew her were very shocked. She always seemed totally normal on the outside, but on the inside she was a deeply troubled serial killer. After her arrest, the media found a website that contained poetry she had written from the perspective of a serial killer. One was titled Inevitable and contained the line, "Heart beats then sprays as this next victim pays her deft dagger's bill." Sounds like Shakespeare, but sounds horrific. Next up at number 9 we have Charles Edmund Cullen. This nurse is the most prolific serial killer in New Jersey, perhaps even in the whole of the US. He admitted to killing 40 patients during his 16-year career as a nurse. However, these were just the ones he could remember by name. Interviews with him suggested that he had killed many more people, perhaps even up to 400, but he couldn't remember their names, only the grisly details of how he killed them. He would poison his victims, often using blood-thinning drugs. When he was eventually arrested, he said that he killed his many victims to end their suffering and stop the hospital dehumanizing them. Don't know how that works. Now this is all despite the fact that many of his victims were not even terminal and were also set to be released from hospital very shortly. Moving on to number 8 now, we have Richard Angelo. Richard Angelo was an American nurse that killed 8 people and poisoned 26 more in 1987. His murder count isn't as high as other people on this list, but his motives were just as disturbing. In New York hospitals, he would inject his patients with drugs to send them into cardiac arrest so that he could attempt to save them in front of his colleagues and then look like a hero. He got a real kick out of it. He didn't seem to care if he actually succeeded in saving their life, it was all about the praise he got for trying. In 1990, he was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. Next up at number 7 we have Beverly Allitt. This English serial killer nurse was convicted of murdering 4 children, attempting to murder 3 more, and causing bodily harm to a further 6. Now this all happened between February and April 1991 over a 59-day period, that was it. Her fellow staff at the hospital only became suspicious of her after her last victim, a 15-month-old called Claire, came into the hospital after an asthma attack but died after 2 cardiac arrests, which happened only when she was left alone with Beverly. She was eventually caught and convicted to 30 years without parole, to be released in 2022 if she was no longer a danger to the public. Coming in at number 6 now we have Amy Archer Gilligan. This one sounds like it's straight out of a horror movie. She was a nurse who killed between 10 and 50 people in her very own nursing home called the Archer Home for the Elderly and Infirm. That is a horror movie name, am I right? Her weapon of choice was arsenic, which she told people she bought to kill rats. Turns out the rats were actually people. Those who knew her grew suspicious when a lot of her clients started dying not long after giving her large amounts of money. She was killing them for their life insurance money. This crazy story ended up inspiring a play called Arsenic and Old Lace, as well as a film of the same name. Moving on to number 5 now, we have Kristen Heather Gilbert, aka the Angel of Death. She was a nurse from Massachusetts, USA, who was convicted in 1996 of 4 murders and 2 attempted murders of her patients. Her preferred method was injecting their IV bags with huge doses of epinephrine, a heart stimulant that would send their hearts into overdrive and eventually kill them. Staff members at the hospital where she killed her victims think she may have actually been responsible for 80 or more deaths and at least 300 medical emergencies. The prosecutors said she used to cause these emergencies so that her police officer boyfriend would have to be called out to the hospital. Crazy. She was given the death penalty but eventually got life in prison with no parole. At the number 4 spot now we have the Lane's Angels of Death. They were 4 Austrian nurses: Maria Gruber, Irene Ladolf, Stefania Meyer, and Waltraud Wagner. Between 1983 and 1989 they killed 49 of their patients by overdosing them with morphine or by forcing water into their lungs. Their victims were usually over 75 and were killed in their own beds by the nurses pouring water into their mouths until they drowned. Elderly patients often have fluid in their lungs, so it was actually an unprovable crime. They were eventually caught after a doctor heard them bragging about a murder in a pub. Their 49 victims were only the ones they confessed to, but investigators think it may have been as high as 200. By 2008, all of them were released from prison. Moving on to number 3 now, we have Donald Harvey. This American serial killer nurse stands out on this list as someone who claims to have murdered more people than they were actually convicted of. He was found guilty of killing between 37 and 57 of his patients at a hospital in Ohio, although he later claimed that number was as high as 87. Between 1970 and 1987, he used a number of different methods to kill his victims, including arsenic, cyanide, insulin, and even suffocation. His motive? Well, he said it was empathy for the suffering of those who were terminally ill. But it didn't stop there. He even poisoned his own partner's food because he thought he might be cheating on him and he didn't want him to leave their apartment. His first parole hearing is in 2043. Next up at number 2 now, we have Jane Topman, aka Jolly Jane. In 1901, this American nurse confessed to 33 murders of her patients. She would experiment on them with morphine and atropine to see what it would do to their nervous systems. She would fake charts and use drugs to drift them in and out of consciousness before killing them. Sometimes she even got into bed with them and held them close until they died. Ugh. The killings continued. She even killed her own foster sister and then tried to win her husband's affection by poisoning him so she could nurse him back to health. She was found not guilty by reason of insanity and spent the rest of her life in an insane hospital. And finally at number 1 we have Janine Ann Jones. This one is particularly disturbing because her victims weren't elderly, they were babies and only ever babies. The Texan nurse was convicted of killing 15-month-old Chelsea McClellan in 1984 while she was in her mother's arms by injecting her with poison. Janine wasn't caught until her fellow nurses started to notice that there was a much higher than average death rate during her shift for babies. All the babies died when she was at work and most of them were assigned directly to her. In the end though, prosecutors only had enough evidence to convict her of that one single murder. She was sentenced to 99 years for her crimes, but due to a strange Texas law, she may be released in 2017 after serving only a third of her time. Well guys, that's over with. I hope you found it interesting, but in a kind of interesting but scary kind of way. Please remember that the reason these videos are interesting in the first place is because cases like this are very, very rare. Millions of doctors and nurses around the world do a fantastic job of looking after all of us every single day. And on that note, I'm Danny Burke. Thanks for watching. Check out some of our more positive videos if you want a bit of a pick-me-up, and I'll see you all in the next video.